Wait, what does he say? That Hitler made the deal with just him and not his country. I don't think Hitler thinks that. In fact, I know Hitler doesn't think that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to matter. But when is someone going to tell Hitler? Not yet. Okay. Yeah, well, keep me posted. All right. Bye. July 29th, 1944. As you know, the Allies began landings in Normandy many weeks ago on June 6. Since then, they've been confined to a fairly small region, though, and have been unable to break through and break out. Well, that begins changing this week. This week, they break through. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, a bomb plot to kill Adolf Hitler failed, but it did lead to many executions and a further tightening of Hitler's control of the German war machine. An Allied operation near Caen failed to take ground, but tied down enemy armor. 57,000 German POWs were paraded through Moscow, and the new Soviet offensives in the Baltics and near Lvov both gained ground. And in Finland, Soviet 32nd Army reported at the end of last week that they had reached the old Soviet-Finnish border. The moment to tighten the screw on Finland had finally come. The first June attacks, though ultimately contained, virtually exhausted Finnish reserves, and after another month of ceaseless hammering, the situation had grown desperate. The Finns struggled furiously to seal up every path and passage from the defile between the two Great Lakes, but it was a losing effort. The Finns made that deal with the Germans last month for more men and equipment in exchange for Finnish President Risto Ryti saying that he will not make any peace with the Soviets without the consent of the German government, nor will he allow any government appointed by him to conduct any sort of peace talks without German consent. But the crisis is looming. This week on the 28th, Ryti tells Finnish Army Commander Gustav Mannerheim that he plans to resign from office. He urges Mannerheim to take up his post. We shall see what happens next week. But the idea is that the deal was made between Germany and Ryti and not with the Finns as a whole. Well, as for the Soviet Red Army, they are still on the move all over this week. Ivan Bagramian's First Baltic Front begins its drive on Shaulyai the 26th, covering nearly 80 kilometers that day and sweeping west of Panavišis. Attempts to rush Shaulyai fail, but the 27th, 8th Guards Mechanized, and 35th Guards Tank Brigade take the town, a major junction. At the very end of July, the whole German front in the north seemed in imminent danger of collapse as key positions tumbled one by one. Dvinsk, 27th of July, followed by Rozhekne the same day, and Shaulyai, then Narva. The fate of the German armies east of the Dvina was hanging in the balance, now tipped in Soviet favor by the fast-moving invasion of Latvia and the successful elimination of the Dvinsk stronghold. The Soviet drive for Shaulyai came as a thoroughly unpleasant shock to the German command, and a catastrophic situation seemed to be in the making. The Soviet seizure of Shaulyai pointed Soviet armies straight at the flank and rear of Army Group North, promising the eventual realization of Bagramian's notion to press the German divisions behind the Dvina, where they could be pounded to pieces by the other two Baltic fronts, 2nd and 3rd. Bagramian still wants to send the bulk of his First Baltic Front towards Riga, and now, unlike last week, Stavka approves. In fact, today, the 29th, he gets official orders to attack Riga and also Memel. I mentioned Dvinsk and Rozhekne falling in that quote, yeah? That is to Andrei Yeremenko's Second Baltic Front, for which he gets a 224-gun salute in Moscow and is decorated Hero of the Soviet Union. He has orders now to advance across the Luban Plain. Ivan Maslenikov's Third Baltic Front is preparing an assault from Lake Pskov to Gulbene. Up at the north coast, the Battle of the Narva bridgehead is reactivated with a Soviet Narva offensive the 24th to the end of the week. This is Leonid Govorov's Leningrad front trying to finally take that city. On the 24th, Soviet 8th Army is defeated, though, by the Estonian 45th Regiment and East Prussian 44th Regiment in the Battle of Alvere. The Soviets do pierce the East Prussian positions, but the Estonian counterattack, backed by German Panther tanks, takes back the frontline positions. Army Detachment Narva begins pulling back from Narva to the Tannenberg Line, though, thinking they can't really hold the city any longer. The Soviets enter the city the 26th. The next day, the fighting on the Tannenberg Line begins, and the Soviets are stopped. Among the Axis defenders there are 25 Estonian and 24 Dutch, Danish, and Flemish infantry battalions, though the armor, artillery, and engineers are mostly German. Finally taking Narva is a pretty big prize, but the Soviets get a bigger one further south, taking Lvov. Their assault there begins the 24th. This is a concentric attack by 60th Army from east and northeast, 10th Tank Corps in the south, and 6th Guards Tank Corps from the west. Some of the city garrison manages to break out the 26th in the only direction possible, southwest towards the Carpathians. The 27th, the Soviets have cleared the city. That same day, Przemysl falls. Boy, that's a blast from the past. If you know, then you know, right? On the 24th, Lublin falls to the Soviets, and 4 days later, Brest does as well. There's a gap this week, like 50 kilometers wide, between German 4th and 1st Panzer armies. And Soviet 1st Guards Tank Army just pours through it with a clear run to the River San. The past 2 weeks, Ivan Konyev's 1st Ukrainian Front and Konstantin Rokossovsky's 1st Belarusian Front have made pretty steady advances. And this has brought the Red Army within striking distance of the Vistula River. On the 27th, Rokossovsky's forces take a bridgehead across the river at Magnushev. Those spearheads of the 8th Guards Army and 2nd Tank Army reached the river a few days earlier. Army Group North Ukraine has thus been split in two, with 4th Panzer Army falling back towards the Vistula, and 1st Panzer Army and 1st Hungarian Army falling back towards the Carpathians. Soviet forces very much are in pursuit. But the Axis getting kicked out of Lvov is not the only thing happening in that city this week. From the 23rd to the 27th is the Lvov Uprising, part of Operation Tempest. The basic operational idea behind Tempest, about which you can see much more on our War Against Humanity series, is for the Polish Home Army, Armia Krajowa, to rise up and take control of Polish cities while the Germans are still preparing their defenses in the face of the advancing Red Army, right? And the Polish civil authorities would then come out of hiding and take power before the Soviets arrive. In Lvov, already back at the beginning of July, the Home Army there was organized and given orders for uprising. As the Soviet threat materialized last week, the German civil authorities left the city, as did most of the Wehrmacht. At the end of the week, as we saw, the Soviet spearheads approached Lvov. On the 22nd, the German forces on the outskirts of the city reoccupied the city proper, and on the 23rd, as this week begins, so too does the Lvov Uprising. This is heavy urban fighting with the Germans. The Poles occupy the south and the west, taking the main railway station and the citadel, giving them much-needed arms. The Soviets enter the city, and everybody fights, and it falls by the 27th. But the uprising does not have the ending that the Poles wish for. The Polish military and civil authorities are asked to meet with the Red Army commanders. And when they do, they are taken prisoner by the NKVD. Then all the men of the Home Army that can be captured are rounded up and pretty much either sent to the Gulag or conscripted into the Red Army. Or they escape. This operation is, of course, planned for and even currently going off in several other cities. But seeing what happened to their guys in Lvov, the Polish government in exile thinks the last chance they have for freedom before the Soviets really arrive is Warsaw. The Warsaw Uprising is scheduled for August 1st, with the idea being to show the world that they have a government, they have civil structure and authorities, and if they can take Warsaw, then the government in exile can return to Poland, like now. But there's some desperation, because when Lublin falls this week, the Polish Committee of National Liberation, set up last week, signs an agreement with the USSR at a ceremony that Stalin, Molotov, and Zhukov take part in. The committee is to be the Polish government, operating in Lublin. So the Poles need to demonstrate that their government in London is the genuine Polish government. Okay, in London already the 25th, the Polish government in exile under Stanisław Mikołajczyk demands that Winston Churchill issue a disclaimer as to any legitimacy of the new committee. But the agreement between the Soviets and the Lublin Committee, as they are called, sort of messes up any British diplomatic counterattack. Stalin's explanation is that because we do not want to, nor shall we, set up our own administration on Polish soil, they're talking to the new committee so that they can set up an administration for Polish territory. He also says that the organizations operating under London Polish authority lack any real influence. Well, he would say that. Churchill tells Mikołaj he'd better hightail it for Moscow and talk to Stalin. So he sets off to go there the long way around via Cairo. Churchill also cables Stalin saying the Western Allies recognizing one Polish government and the Soviets another one would be a disaster. And amid all this, the plans are moving forward for a Warsaw Uprising next week. But with all the Allied progress lately in the East, there's been frustration about the lack of it in the West. I mentioned last week that SHAEF, Supreme Allied Command in the West, was unhappy with the lack of progress of Operation Goodwood and its commander Bernard Montgomery. This is a considerable understatement. It is fair to say that all hell broke loose at SHAEF in the aftermath of Goodwood. Most of the venom came from Air Marshals Tedder and Koningen, who were apparently disgusted with the lack of progress, bolstered by the media trumpeting Monty's premature claims of breakthrough. Tedder talked with Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower and hinted at removing Monty from command. And some generals actually were removed after Goodwood. This happened last week, I just didn't have time to cover it then. Eisenhower met with Monty the 20th in Normandy and was surprised to find Montgomery was pretty satisfied with the results of Goodwood. Eisenhower is a bit confused, but he has no intention of sacking Montgomery. Tedder is still on the warpath this week, writing on the 23rd to Eisenhower that he has no faith in Monty's plans, but does have faith in Omar Bradley and his commanders, though he does not think their impending attacks will gain much ground because of the terrain. Well, Tedder is wrong about that, for Operation Cobra goes off this week, and it does indeed break out. Those words do mean a few different things, though. Breaking out of the bocage, the deadly hedgerow fighting of the past 6 weeks, breaking out of the Cotentin, and breaking out into space for mobile warfare. Cobra is actually designed to make a breakthrough, not a breakout. But still, the aim is to break through the German lines west of Saint-Lô. 1st and 3rd armies will, ideally, bust past Coutances to Avranches. Then 3rd will head for Brittany and 1st towards the Loire. An attack already the 22nd and 23rd by 90th Division against the high ground at Saint-Germain-sur-Sèvre fails. But D-Day for Operation Cobra is July 24th. There is to be a huge bombing run by heavy and medium bombers from U.S. 8th and 9th Air Forces. 1st Army Commander Omar Bradley makes it clear that the bombers are not to fly in over the troops, but across the front from west to east or east to west. His troops are also pulled back about a kilometer north of the bomb line, the Perrières-Saint-Loup Highway, and all bombs are to be dropped to the south of the road. On the 24th at 1 p.m., the planes go out. But Allied Air Forces Commander Trafford Lee-Mallory calls the planes back because of poor weather and low clouds and orders the mission delayed for 24 hours. But this does not reach all of the planes, and 300 bombers drop their loads on the U.S. 30th Infantry Division, killing 25, wounding 125, and alerting the Germans that an attack is coming. So the planes go out again at 11 a.m. the 25th, and once again come in over the U.S. positions and not along them from the side, over 4,000 strong. They blanket the whole area with bombs, and a bunch do again fall on the unfortunate Americans, killing 111 and wounding nearly 500 more. They kill a whole lot more unfortunate Germans, though, well over 1,000 from 7th Army, and wreck several command posts, and then the infantry makes its attack. By nightfall that day, however, they don't seem to have gotten that far. 7th Corps has crossed the highway just a kilometer or two. However, the Americans had done better than they knew. They were indeed encountering opposition, but this opposition was the best that 7th Army could manage. They could do no more, and this was soon noticed. The German defense line across the Saint-Loup-Perrières road was tough, but very shallow. Those defense lines and interlinked fields of fire that had held up the Goodwood offensive were not present south of Saint-Loup. There was nothing behind the German front line at Saint-Lô, for the reserves that should have been there were standing behind Caen. German 7th Army Commander Paul Hauser is well aware of this, but what can he do? On the 26th, the attacks are renewed, and they gain ground and pick up speed. And by the afternoon, the German defense is indeed coming apart at the seams as the Americans advance up to 10 kilometers. The 27th, Marigny is cleared, and they press on towards Coutances, taking it the 28th, though the Germans do manage to pull out of the Cotentin and escape being trapped. So, Operation Cobra is over after 3 days, but now Bradley wants to exploit it. 19th and 5th Corps are to go into heavy action towards the junction town of Vire. Meanwhile, the Canadians, with armor support, are attacking down the Caen-Falaise road in Operation Spring starting the 25th. This is a holding and engaging operation, not expecting big territorial gains. Indeed, it does not produce them, but ties down the 1st and 9th SS Panzers just when Cobra goes off to the west as planned. But this comes at a cost. With the exception of the Dieppe raid, this is the costliest day of the war for the Canadians, according to their official history. There's some other fighting this week in the general area, which I'll backtrack to next week, but by this week's end, units from Britain's 30th and 8th Corps are poised to launch Operation Bluecoat to overrun the land between the Vire and the Orne. It is set to go off tomorrow. In Italy, the Germans are still slowly pulling back, beginning to cross the Arno and leave the Arno line and withdraw to their final defense line, the Gothic line. They do, however, have some serious issues ahead. Every bridge across the Po had been destroyed, and not a single train could cross the river. The only way Kesselring could get supplies to the Gothic line was by using ferries and hastily built pontoons by night. Further west, Genoa, on the coast, had been isolated by widespread rail and road destruction. All routes from France were closed, while the Brenner Pass through the Alps between Italy and Austria was also blocked. With almost all railways cut in numerous places, with roads badly disrupted, and with German motor transport shot to pieces, German efforts to supply the front were once again causing major headaches. That they also faced repeated attacks and further acts of sabotage from partisan bands was making the task even harder. German patience with these troublesome guerrillas was beginning to wear very thin indeed. And so Axis Italian leader Benito Mussolini authorizes the formation of the Black Brigades this week on the 26th to fight the partisans. Their headquarters is in Cesano Maderno at Fascist Party headquarters, and the provincial federal fascist commissioners become Black Brigade commanders. James Holland points out, though, that since the huge majority of civilians in northern Italy are no longer interested in fascism, the intimidating look of the brigades and the militarization of the fascist party is a serious high-risk strategy. The Japanese are also trying a serious high-risk strategy this week over on Guam. Unlike on Saipan, here the Japanese cannot count on any local help. The 24,000 or so Chamorros are very much pro-American. And by the 25th, Japanese commander Takeshi Takashima has lost like 2/3 of his combat troops. He must now either attack the Americans or withdraw into the dense jungles. He opts for a full-on assault to push the 3rd Marine Division back into the sea. Takashima planned to exploit gaps that existed among the front lines of the division's 3 infantry regiments, envelop the Americans, roll up the rear areas, and destroy them in detail. The concept had almost no chance of succeeding, and promised little besides squandering the lives of Takashima's men and weakening the Japanese hold on Guam. In spite of this, his plan gets a commendation from Imperial headquarters. The attack goes off the night of the 25th, and the attackers are devastated, losing 3,500 irreplaceable troops. The Marines lose around 850 killed, wounded, or missing. The Japanese then retreat into the jungle, but Takashima is shot and killed. The 28th, the 2 American beachheads are linked up, and by then they control half the island, ready to move against the other half as the week ends. Also in the Marianas, on the 24th, are landings on Tinian by the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, 15,600 strong. These landings will be called by Amphibious Corps Commander Holland Smith the perfect amphibious operation of the Second World War. Artillery, naval guns, and planes pummel the enemy, and a week of fighting annihilates the Japanese garrison of 9,000 for the cost of 328 killed and 1,571 wounded. And with that slaughter and a few notes, I will end this week of the war. On the 24th, Majdanek death camp is taken by the Soviets. This is the first such camp freed and is a real eye-opener for the world. Again, this is covered in depth in War Against Humanity by Spartacus Olsson. On the 26th, a Messerschmitt Me-262 damages a de Havilland Mosquito. This is the first ever aerial victory for a jet fighter. On the 28th is the first operational use of the Me-163B Comet rocket fighter. Yep, this is a rocket-powered interceptor. The only one we've ever seen operational, and maybe the only one that ever will be. It's also the first piloted plane ever to reach a speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour. These planes are to be used as bomber interceptors since they can only fly for around 7 minutes at a time. And the week ends with the Finns maybe reaching the end of their tether, Army Group North in trouble from all sides, slaughter in the Marianas, and the fall of Lvov. And the Lvov Uprising with its unhappy ending for the Polish Home Army. That's even more bad news for the Poles, who've had nothing but bad news for years now. And the Lublin Committee may well end up being the official Polish government. Who knows? What would that mean for the one in exile? The one actively working with the Western Allies and fighting hard in Italy and all. Churchill is likely right that the Allies separately recognizing two separate Polish governments can only lead to disaster. There's also the fact that these two Polish government claimants recognize different Polish borders. One, the 1939 border, and one, the Curzon Line, which cuts off a big chunk of the east and gives it to the Soviets. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be messy. And when things get messy these days, lots and lots of people die. I've mentioned our War Against Humanity series twice this episode, and I'll do so again now because this show and that show very much go together, and you should watch both to better understand the war. The newest episode of that is right here. It is the Time Ghost Army that finances all of our series, and we could not survive without them. So to be part of this adventure, join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest army officers, and the army member of the week is Myron B or Myron B. I'm not certain how that's to be pronounced, but I love you anyway, Myron or Myron B. Thank you. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.